I was lifted from my stillness and lowered into a realm whose name my guide refused to speak. He only said, "This is where those who have died go." The first thing I noticed was the sky. It was not a sky. It was a shape. Something vast hung above the realm, blotting out any hint of the sun. Its outline devoured the horizon from end to end, a colossal form pressed low over the land like a lid upon a pot. I could not take it in all at once. Wherever I looked, some part of it dominated the heavens. An immense underside that pulsed with slow, unsettling life. From its body, long appendages drifted downward like roots or tendrils, trailing through the grey air. Where they passed, the light dimmed even further, and a deeper shadow settled on the ground, as though the very soil had been stained by its presence. "This is the tormentor," my guide said quietly. "The great one. The first hunger." Its shadow lay over everything. Beneath that shadow, the land spread out in muted greys, neither dark nor light, a hushed in-between that swallowed distance. Figures drifted across it with a strange, weighted slowness, as though moving under water. Every step seemed borrowed from a memory they had never fully lived. They followed paths that felt familiar yet hollow, like sleepwalkers repeating gestures long after forgetting why they began. Some released sudden spurts of laughter, sharp and brittle, cracking the silence without warmth. The sound held no joy, only the echo of something once understood, habit posing as happiness. Others let out low, shapeless moans. They were not cries of direct pain, but of a craving without form, a hunger that had forgotten its object. Their hands lifted toward things that were not there, grasping at shadows of desires they no longer remembered. Most simply cycled through their motions, turning their heads at invisible cues, touching their faces as if checking that they still existed, muttering broken syllables that crumbled as they left the tongue. They stopped and started, reached and withdrew, reenacting rituals whose meanings had dissolved long ago. Their movements were faded imitations of purpose, patterns turning in on themselves without origin and without end. They moved together in a dream not their own, half-present shadows obeying the soft command of instinct's hidden pull. Their limbs acted with eerie certainty, while their eyes flickered with the distant glassy quiet of those suspended between waking and oblivion. I watched them shamble through their dim routines, each convinced they were awake, each certain their motions were their own, but nothing in their movements felt chosen. Their eyes twitched toward pointless sounds. Their hearts jolted at urges that rose from nowhere. Their mouths formed words shaped by something beneath thought, a silent puppeteer threading impulses through their veins. I was about to ask my guide what held them in such a stupor when a vibration passed through the air, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to come from the sky shape above and from the earth beneath us at the same time. The tormentor shivered. Its tendrils stirred, drifting lower. Where they brushed the air, dark motes fell like ash, settling into the ground. The soil swelled in small mounds wherever those motes sank, as though the land had been seeded. I watched as some of the mounds split open like eggs. From each fissure something emerged. They were not fully formed at first, just smears of shadow gathering themselves, pulling darkness around their cores. Then slowly they took on shape, hunched, twisted, thin, many-limbed, each one different, each one wrong. They rose from the earth only to attach themselves to the nearest drifting figure. One clung to a woman's shoulders, heavy and gluttonous, its fingers sinking into her chest as it drove her to grab at whatever passed her hands. Another wrapped around a woman's throat like a necklace of smoke, whispering doubt into her ear with a mouth that never closed. A third scurried around a child's ankles, changing shape constantly, luring him in circles after lights that receded with every step. Some shadows dug their claws into backs, urging their hosts forward with restless agitation. Some wrapped themselves around heads like hoods, pouring thoughts into ears. Some nested in the hollow of the chest, pulsing whenever their hosts grew still, pushing them back into motion. "What are those?" I asked, my voice barely more than breath. My guide's eyes followed the writhing shapes without flinching. "Fragments," he said. "Offspring of the one above. Its urges given form. They emerge from the soil and claim each soul, not out of malice, but to drive its chaos toward the one fracture that can set it free." I watched in horror as the wanderers responded to their shadows without seeing them. When a shadow tugged, a body moved. When a shadow whispered, a head turned. When a shadow pressed its claws into the chest, the host clutched at something nearby. Food, another body, a phantom object, anything. "They believe these movements are their own," my guide said. "They believe these cravings are themselves." A cold ache spread through me. I looked up at the colossal body blotting out the sky. Its underside pulsed slowly as if breathing. Its tendrils shifted, spilling more motes into the air, more seeds into the soil, more eggs into the land. "It is not like you," my guide replied. "It has no malice, no kindness. It obeys only its design. It is hunger made law, reaction made flesh, a crown of ancient instinct." He paused. "The great hunger takes many forms," he whispered. "Some are easier to miss than others." A tremor passed through me. The realm tilted for a moment toward recognition. I watched a figure stagger across the plain, 3 shadows clinging to it, one dragging it left, one pushing it forward, one tugging it backward by the spine. It lurched, stopped, spun, collapsed, rose again, muttering senseless promises. "How long have they wandered like this?" I asked. My guide's gaze drifted across the grey plain, watching the shuffling figures as one might watch waves returning again and again to the same shore. "Longer than you would believe," he said, "for each of them began far below where you see them now." His hand swept toward the ground. They rose first as creatures that crawled and clawed their way through a world of instinct, shapes that knew nothing but hunger and fear. And when they could bear no more of that tight darkness, something in them strained upward. They broke their old skins and stepped into new forms. A figure passed near us, blank-eyed, half-dreaming, and my guide nodded toward it. When they grew beyond the beasts, they entered shapes like this. Forms that could stand upright, forms that could speak, forms that could choose. He paused, then added with quiet sorrow. But each time they reached such a form, they forgot the climb that brought them there. They forgot the darkness they had outgrown. They forgot the countless shapes they wore before this one. I felt a chill move through me. So they have lived many lives. He tilted his head, considering my question as though it were too small for the truth. "They have worn many faces," he said at last, "and each face is shed the moment they rise from it. They step into a new appearance as easily as stepping through a doorway, leaving behind all memory of the last. Only their habits follow them, the cravings, the fears, the unfinished hungers. Those shape the new form, though the form never knows why." Far in the fog, a wanderer shifted shape for a heartbeat, a flicker of who he once was, then gone. "They believe they are the face they wear now," my guide continued, "but they have worn 1,000 such masks. They remember none of them. That forgetting is the rule of the climb." I swallowed. "And how long does their climb go on?" My guide looked toward the dim horizon where the watchers sometimes appeared as distant glimmers. "Until a form finally asks where all the others came from," he murmured. "Until one face grows tired of being only a face." "But they seem alive," I whispered. "They seem," he corrected gently, "nothing more. Their movements are echoes, reactions misinterpreted as choices." We walked. The ground beneath us was soft, almost warm, as though made from layers of discarded emotion pressed into a path by countless feet. Shade beasts trailed their hosts like leashes, that had learned to walk. Ahead, the land sloped downward into a hollow filled with swirling fog. Shapes moved inside it, people running after dissolving objects, others wrestling shadows that mirrored them perfectly, still others reaching for floating lights that darkened whenever they drew near. "This place is suffering," I said. "It is not punishment," my guide replied. "It is repetition. A dream that cannot end, because the dreamer refuses to wake." We descended. The air grew thicker as we moved downward, as though it resisted our passing. A muted heat rose from the earth, soft at first, then steadily gathering strength. It was not the warmth of fire, but something older, heavier, something that clung to the skin like breath trapped beneath the ground. The hollow at the bottom glowed faintly, not with light, but with motion. Bodies shifted there in restless currents, hundreds of them, swept along by urges that never settled. They moved as though caught in the undertow of a dream, each one circling something they could not name. A woman whispered a phrase over and over, her lips barely willing to shape it. Another reached for a figure made of smoke, clutching it with desperate tenderness until it collapsed in her arms, leaving her gasping for what had never been there. All of it had the feeling of a storm, without a sky. "What is this place?" I asked quietly. My guide watched the shifting mass below with the patience of someone who had seen this many times. "This is the deep region," he said, "the first chamber, the place where the oldest impulses settle when a soul falls into itself." I felt the ground pulse under my feet, a slow, thick movement, as though the earth were breathing from somewhere far beneath us. "Here," he continued, "they are pulled into the long forgetting. They act out what once drove them, though the memory of its origin has vanished." He gestured toward the pit. "This is where they return to what lies beneath choice, to motions older than thought." The figures below moved faster now, some reaching, some clinging, some collapsing into the hollow only to rise again. Their faces bore the same expression, an ache without direction, a hunger without object. "Their shadows shape this region around them," my guide said softly. "Every old impulse, every unfinished longing, every reaction they could not bear to release, these gather here and take form. They rise from the earth, bind themselves to the wanderer, and guide him toward the patterns he has never questioned." A figure lurched toward us, blank-eyed, shuddering. A dark shape clung to its back, a formless weight, shifting like something alive. The figure muttered a single word. "Again." It stopped abruptly. The shadow tightened, its presence sinking toward the base of its spine. It stumbled forward, compelled by a force it could neither resist nor understand. My guide reached out and laid 2 fingers upon the figure's brow. For a breath, the figure sagged. His eyes softened. A faint glow rose within him, not from the place where the shadow fed, but from somewhere higher, somewhere that had long been forgotten. It flickered weakly, like a spark beneath ash. But then the air trembled. A low hum rolled through the hollow, and the ground beneath us gave a subtle shudder. The shadow reacted instantly. It drew itself deeper into the figure, pulling the faint glow downward, smothering it beneath the weight of its influence. The spark vanished. The figure resumed his circling, the word "again" drifting from his lips like the echo of something endlessly repeated. I felt grief rise in me, not sharp, but heavy, like a truth settling where it cannot be ignored. "Why does the tormentor do this?" I asked. "Why hold them here?" "The tormentor does not hold them," my guide said, turning to me fully. "It reflects them. It gives form to what they will not face. If a soul clings to fear, it wakes in a realm shaped by fear. If it clings to craving, it wakes in a realm shaped by hunger. If it clings to anger, It wakes in a realm shaped by war. And those who cling to nothing? I asked. They begin to awaken, he said simply. They begin to rise. A sudden shriek split the air, not of terror, not of agony, but of something breaking inside itself. My guide lifted his head. Another one is beginning, he murmured. Come, you must see what becomes of those who allow the breaking. He took my arm, and the ground beneath us fell away like sand through fingers, revealing a vertical shaft of dim light ascending through the fog. We rose, not by stepping, not by flight, but as though truth itself were drawing us upward. As we drifted, the hollow shrank below. Among the shifting masses, one figure stood out, slumped on a stone, her head bowed, 3 shadows clinging to her, one at her throat, one around her belly, one wrapped around the back of her skull like a hood. The air around her chest flickered, that faint glow again. My guide gestured, and the world narrowed until he and I were standing before that one woman. She did not move, yet something within her trembled. The glow in her chest brightened, then faltered, then brightened again, as though some buried part of her were arguing with the rest. The tormentor shuddered and let out a violent shriek that pierced the fog like a spear of sound. High above, one of its tendrils stiffened and twisted. A deeper darkness rippled through the air. The 3 shadows clinging to the woman tightened their grip, digging in like desperate animals. They hissed voicelessly and pressed closer, flooding her body with waves of hunger, fear, and numbness. The glow fought to stay. My guide raised his hand above the woman's crown. He did not touch, but the air thickened, filling with currents I could see, colours bleeding from the soul, lines of force humming through bone and nerve. Out of that strange, luminous vision, another presence appeared. He sat beside the woman as if he had always been there, composed not of matter but of structure, lines of light woven into a form that seemed both delicate and unbreakable. His edges blurred and reformed like a flame learning to hold its shape. A watcher, my guide said quietly. He had no eyes, yet he regarded her with a perception that pierced through everything. He had no hands, yet a palpable field of tenderness radiated from him, a steady warmth in the cold, shadow-soaked air. The shadows reacted to him at once. The one at her throat coiled tighter. The one around her belly inflated grotesquely. The one on her skull pressed its face into her mind. The woman's breath shallowly quickened, her body trying to retreat into the familiar fog of its own sleep. The watcher leaned closer. Not in a physical sense, he was beyond such limits, but with his essence pressing downward like a gentle, relentless weight onto the center of her being. The glow in her chest flared, then flickered violently. "What is he doing?" I whispered. "He is killing her," my guide replied. The answer shocked me. I felt anger prickle in my chest. "Killing her?" I turned on him. "Why?" "He is tearing her chains from the inside," he said calmly. "The chains and the flesh that clings to them. The parts of her that refuse to let go must feel the tearing as pain." The watcher pushed deeper. The woman's back arched. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream as waves of agony shook through her. The shadows writhed wildly, their forms distorting in a frenzy of resistance. One tried to sink completely into her spine. Another dug its claws into her ribs. The third clamped itself onto her heart. The watcher's light entered her chest like a knife made of fire. I winced. "This is cruelty," I whispered. My guide did not look away. "This is precision," he said. "Mercy in its truest form. Comfort keeps her bound. Softness would let her sink back. Only a piercing of the heart can heal her." The woman convulsed. The watcher brought his forehead to hers, their forms almost merging. The glow in her chest surged into painful brilliance. I saw images flicker through her. Every moment she had obeyed a shadow instead of herself, every time she had quieted her own questions, every time she had traded her spark for the safety of numbness. She screamed then, not with the panic of a startled animal, but with the raw sound of something being torn free from its own nest. The shadows shrieked in silence. The one on her ribcage was shot off like it had been hit by a bolt of lightning, hurling itself backward into the fog. The one around her spine split, spilling its darkness onto the ground before evaporating. The one clamped around her heart clung on hardest, tightening until her body shook as though freezing. The watcher did not withdraw. "He will not stop?" I asked, horrified. "If he stops before the last one breaks," my guide said, "she will fall asleep again. And the next time, the shadows will have learned her every escape. She will be harder to reach. Pain ignored becomes a deeper prison." "How can she endure it?" I whispered. "Because a part of her has chosen this," my guide answered. "The smallest, meekest part, the part that stopped resisting its own discomfort, that finally bowed to the fire rather than running from it. That is why he came. He is her answer to that surrender." The woman's body shuddered once, twice, then exploded into movement. She jerked upright, eyes wide and wild. The last shadow clinging to her heart shrieked voicelessly and tried to bore deeper, but the glow blazing in her chest surged upward, flooding her head with a violet-colored light. Her terror reached its peak. Then something in her broke, not outwardly, inwardly, like a knot loosening after years of tension. Her scream dissolved into a sob that shook her whole frame. Her hands, once clawed with resistance, opened helplessly at her sides. The final shadow was pierced. It ripped itself loose with such violence that it lost cohesion, shredding into tattered flecks of darkness that the air refused to hold. She collapsed against the watcher. He held her, not with arms, but with presence, surrounding her like a warm tide. Her chest heaved, her face twisted with the remembered echoes of pain. And then slowly, like a storm quieting, her features softened. In that quieting, I saw something flicker across her face that I had not seen on any wanderer here. Peace. Not bliss, not ecstasy, just an unburdened absence of struggle. "Is she free now?" I asked. "Not yet," my guide said. "But the hooks that held her down have been cut. Now she can rise." The ground beneath her dissolved. The world opened upward. A narrow column of pale light stretched above, piercing through layers of shadow. The great body in the sky trembled, its underside rippling as though uncomfortable with this intrusion. For the first time I saw a hint of something beyond it, a thinner, purer brightness pressing at its edges from above. The woman's form began to lift, drawn toward the column. Not by her own strength, she had none left, but by having stopped resisting. She surrendered to the upward pull. As she rose, the spiral-shaped glow in her chest flared, trembling softly at first, then igniting in a sharp brightness as the spiral stirred into motion. The light spilled outward in quiet waves, brushing across the wanderers nearest to her. Where it touched them, something stirred. For a heartbeat, faint embers flickered in their chests, small, trembling sparks, like forgotten memories straining to surface. A few of the wanderers paused mid-motion, their heads lifting slightly, as though hearing a call from far away. But the shadows clinging to them tightened, smothering the light almost as quickly as it appeared. The sparks dimmed, folded back into silence, and the wanderers resumed their circling, unaware that anything had changed. Still, I had seen it. The rising of one soul had made the others momentarily remember that they too were made of something that could rise. The watcher rose with her, entwined in her light. Together they spiraled into the narrow shaft. As they ascended, the murk of the realm thinned around them, and the shadow of the tormentor grew translucent. "This is the first rising," my guide said, "when a soul stops fighting its necessary pain, when it bows instead of fleeing. The meek ascend, not because they are small, but because they stop wrestling the hand that cuts their chains." We followed. The realm blurred into layers, below the hollow of repetition, above shifting fields of memory and feeling. The column carried us through scenes formed from the woman's former existence, flashes of hunger, grasping, anger, numbness, brief kindness, quickly drowned. She watched them now with a strange clarity, pain still etched in her but unaccompanied by denial. "Why must she see all this?" I asked. "To awaken fully," my guide replied. "She must understand what kept her asleep. Pain breaks the chains. Vision shows her what they were." The scenes dissolved, leaving only the woman, the watcher, and the column of light. We rose higher. The shadows that had once clung to her hovered at the edge of the shaft, unable to re-enter. Some lurked, some slunk away, drawn back to the egg fields below, waiting for other souls to feed on. "She will not be rid of the possibility of shadow," my guide said softly. "But she has seen their faces now. That knowing is a shield." The column opened into a vast, still expanse. There was no land here, no sky, only a spaciousness that felt like a held breath. The great tormentor's body loomed far below us now. A dark mass stretched over the lower realm like a false ceiling. Above that something else shone. Not a form, not a creature, a presence. It appeared everywhere at once, too vast to be seen with any one point of view, yet too intimate to fear. It filled the stillness the way light fills a room after a curtain is drawn. "The All," my guide murmured. The soul trembled. The watcher's light folded around her one last time, like a cloak being drawn closed. I sensed him whisper something to her, not in language, but in a bell-like tone that felt like the remembered echo of a song of victory. Her light quivered, then steadied. The long tension that had defined her existence seemed to drain out of her in a single, shuddering exhale. "I remember," she said. The words did not pass through her mouth. They formed in the very fabric of the space. The All answered with silence, and yet that silence contained everything. Her light loosened its boundaries. At first it was terrifying to watch, her edges dissolving, her individuality thinning. But as she merged with the radiance, nothing of her vanished. It expanded. The small flame became part of a fire so immense that it no longer made sense to speak of parts. The watcher bowed, not to a superior, but to a truth completed, and for a moment his form wavered, as if ready to dissolve into the radiance above. But he did not vanish. The brilliance that awaited him did not absorb him. Instead, it pressed gently against him like a hand resting on a shoulder, an acknowledgement, not a summons. And then, with a solemn grace, the watcher turned. He began to descend. Wrapped in light, carrying the one who had risen, he returned downward through the column, back toward the layers of shadow and wandering. The ascended soul's radiance had changed, no longer the desperate flicker of someone seeking escape, but the steady glow of one who had seen the source and understood the law. "This is the rebirth," my guide whispered. "Those who rise do not escape the abyss. They re-enter it with their sight restored. The All sends them back to carve paths for others. Order descends into chaos so chaos may learn its shape." As the pair drifted downward, their light touched the grey plain beneath us. Wherever it passed, slumbering sparks stirred faintly in the chests of the wanderers. A few paused mid-step, as though remembering something for the first time in ages. Most continued, held fast by their shadows, but a seed had been planted. "This," my guide said, "is how the great fight begins. Light against dark." Limbus, written by Hugo White.